I'm Chris Fox, and this is the Bourbonite. All right, so bourbon has a foggy history itself. There's a lot of different stories about how this thing became to be called bourbon and where it actually came from originally. One of the stories is Elijah Craig. You may know the name from Bourbon, called Elijah Craig as well. He was actually a Baptist minister in Kentucky and decided to char the inside of oak casks and then throw some spirits in there and wait and see what happened. Obviously, we've benefited from that. At the same time, there was another guy. His name was Jacob Spears. He was over the county line in actually a county called Bourbon in Kentucky, who was doing a similar thing, and he started calling his whiskey Bourbon after the county. There's a number of other stories, and we don't really know where they kind of came from, which kind of is an interesting connection with some of the cultural things that go along with this stuff. I hate to bring up the blues, but it is one of those things that has a mystical origin that we all kind of like to fantasize about. But nonetheless, it's really unknown where this stuff came from. What's sure is what it is and how it's made. So, bourbon itself, to be called bourbon, needs to meet 6 different criteria legally. Seriously. I don't know what they do. I have no idea what they do if you make bourbon that doesn't meet these 6 criteria and then call it bourbon. They get to take your first child. The bourbon gods destroy your life. First of all, it needs to be made in the U.S.A, which makes this drink 100% American, which is kind of an interesting concept. The Scots have Scotch, and there's Irish whiskey, and now there's even Japanese whiskey. But if it's going to be bourbon, it needs to be made in the United States. It also needs to be made from a grain mixture that is at least 51% corn. The moonshine essentially has to be 51% corn or more. So also, in order to be called bourbon, it needs to be aged in new charred oak casks. They can't be old, they can't be reused, they need to be brand new. Other liquors can actually be aged in bourbon casks, but if it's going to be bourbon, it needs to be in new charred oak casks. It can't be distilled at more than 160 proof. That's 80% alcohol. So the moonshine can peel paint, but it can't kill you, I guess. At that point, it has to enter the aging barrel at no more than 120 proof. That's 62.5% alcohol. And then it has to be bottled at 80 proof, or 40% alcohol, or more. So at that point, it's pretty stringent on exactly how much alcohol is in bourbon. There's a whole bunch of other fancy contingencies that can determine whether or not it's called straight bourbon, or if it's considered a blend, how much of that blend contains different parts of other whiskeys and bourbons and whatnot. But we'll worry about that some other time. So then at that point, the whole reason the Bourbonite exists is because there is much more to this stuff than just those 6 steps. There is much more than just this brown liquid that half the world hates and the other half just absolutely adores. And that's what the Bourbonite's all about. So there was a New Yorker article that said that there is something visceral and personal that transcends price points or mash bills. And that is exactly it. Bourbon is uniquely American, but each bourbon, each cask in and of itself has its own personality. And that's what makes this culture something to be reckoned with, could be a way to say it. But that's really what makes this culture something that needs to be explored. There's plenty of people out there that like to taste bourbon. There's plenty of people that can have the perfect tongue to tell you exactly what all the flavors and nuances are in this. And I envy them. I would love to be able to taste like that. But that's not what this is about. I will taste some, don't get me wrong. This shit's delicious. But it's far more than just a brown liquid in a jar. So if you're like me and you just kind of want to explore what bourbon has to offer, subscribe to the YouTube channel and join me on all the adventures that we get to go on as we explore the culture, the art, the music, and even a little bit of philosophy and anthropology that bourbon has to offer.
Okay, now you're good.
You sure?
Yes.
Positive?
Positive.
Don't fuck this up.
It's fucked.
Yeah, it's fine. I do well under pressure.
Okay.
Especially when I'm 1 beer and half a bourbon in. It's fine.
Drink more bourbon.
Right? Drink more bourbon. Keep going.
Good, yeah. I think the video will be better the more you drink it.
If I'm drunk by the end,
Then we've had a good...
that's how you know it's a good shoot.